Hello everyone, this is CYL10TFT, and welcome to this PBE Set 16 TFT video, where I'll be providing an instructional voiceover on how I think you should play the Ixtal comp and how I end up playing the Ixtal comp this game. Now if you do enjoy this video or have any suggestions, please let me know down in the comments below. If you don't know what the Ixtal trait is, it is the Cashout trait for Set 16. However, it's much more interesting than most Cashout traits that we've seen in previous sets. This is because the Ixtal trait has you complete multiple quests on your way to cashing out. These quests can be anywhere from doing a certain amount of damage with Ixtal units, blocking a certain amount of damage, to losing, winning, or alternating combats, or even just having a certain amount of gold or spending a certain amount of gold on XP or rerolls. Now the reason I'm looking for the Ixtal comp here is because I do have that Kiana and Nika, which are both Ixtal units, only missing Milio to hit the 3 Ixtal breakpoint, and I also have a Briar, who's a Slayer along with Kiana, and she's just a very strong unit who could help me save HP in the early game. Now there are two things that you're looking for with the Ixtal comp. The first is the cash out. The more stacks or sunshards that you get as you're playing Ixtal, the better your cash out is. But also the 7-cost unit Brock, which has been added in this set. He's a massive golem that you unlock after you collect 500 sunshards. If you do manage to unlock Brock, which can be very difficult for many games, he will definitely make it worth your time. That is because he is a behemoth that knocks up enemies on every attack, and knocks up the entire enemy board on cast, while also being immune to CC himself. As for augment selection here, I immediately skipped past Worth the Wait because I didn't want to be forced into another comp. 2-Trick could have been a good option, however, I ended up seeing Epoch here, which allows me to immediately go level 5 and use some free rerolls to try and find Milio to get Ixtal in, and indeed I do find him on that very first roll. And now you can see the Ixtal quests appear on the bottom of the screen. The two left ones buy 24 XP and keep my bench full would have required a lot of gold, which I didn't have after leveling to 5 and buying that Milio, so I ended up taking the very risky alternate winning and losing combats for 6 rounds here. While this is very difficult to pull off, its reward matches its difficulty because the 250 sunshards would immediately take me halfway to Brock just after 6 combats. Because I have to alternate winning and losing combats, I need to be able to make a very strong board in order to guarantee wins. Because of that, I end up slamming some items on the Briar and buying that Zoe because they can be very powerful units early. Another thing to think about is, what if I didn't hit that Milio and didn't have Ixtal on my board? Well then, I should have looked for Bruisers and rolled one more time to unlock Bard, because Bard Bruisers is another really good comp, and it requires 4 rerolls before the very first carousel, which 3 of them have already been done because of the Epoch. Now that I've won a combat, I need to make sure that I can lose the next combat. This might be pretty difficult in my scenario because I am level 5, meaning I'll have to play 5 units if I don't want to sell my Zoe, for example. So in order to make sure I lose, or at least make sure I get as weak as possible, I buy this Jin and play him because he has no traits for my comp and he's also just a very weak backline unit without items. Of course, if this were ranked, there is a decent chance that people would have been scouting my board, seeing that I needed to lose a combat, and might have griefed me. But because this is PBE, most people aren't scouting. Additionally, if that were true and people were scouting, I probably would have sold my entire board except the Ixtals to make sure it was actually as weak as possible. Now, for the next few rounds, the most important thing for me is going to be making sure that I can play the strongest board possible on the turns that I need to win. In order to do that, I'm going to buy all the strong units that I can. However, in my current shop, there aren't really any units that can contribute to my board. Now that the Ixtal trait is laid out for you, let's talk about Targon. This Zoe, and also many other units that I'll buy soon, are Targonians. That means that they have no traits except Targon, which doesn't actually contribute to your board. Instead, the units are very powerful and therefore are helpful with Ixtal because I won't be able to play many traits anyways. Here, I start to scout other people's boards. This is because I need to win this combat, and I don't think that my board is currently super powerful. However, I decide that it should be enough, and I end up fighting the combat without making any more upgrades. Thankfully, I do fight this extremely weak board with an Aphelios carry, with Aphelios not being the greatest unit and his frontline being pretty weak, so I'm not too worried this combat. While this combat is playing, please feel free to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you do enjoy this instructional and also going to be entertaining once I cash out content. Also, please let me know in the comments what you think about this video, because this is my first time making any sort of content, and I want to know if people find this useful or what I could do to change it to make it better for you. In the carousel, I am again thinking about what can make my board as strong as possible, because while I don't have to win the next combat, the one after that will probably be the hardest combat of them all, because if I face someone who was streaking, they're also going to be trying to play the strongest board. I end up grabbing the 3-cost sword because it's the most expensive unit on the carousel, and it also lets me build Edge of Night on my Briar, which will eventually be a good item for Brock, as he is a frontline AD bruiser unit. I do end up making the Edge of Night, as it will be useful once I have to win again, but for this combat I do have to lose, so I end up making my board as weak as possible, just as I did in the other combat that I was forced to lose. After losing that combat, I do need a win again, and what I should be doing here is scouting to make sure that my board is absolutely strong enough to beat every single other board in the lobby, especially considering there's a dude who is still 100 HP, hasn't lost yet, and therefore likely has an extremely strong board. However, I instead decide to econ up and save my money because I am very poor due to the leveling and rolling in the very beginning of the game. This is almost certainly a mistake and a needless risk towards me losing the game, because if I do end up losing this combat, I'll lose all progress towards my Ixtal quest and definitely not win this game. However, I do thankfully not face the strongest person in the lobby, instead facing a somewhat weaker board, but the combat is still pretty close, meaning that I almost certainly would have lost to the strongest player in the lobby and then would have lost the game. After winning this combat, the only thing between me and those 250 sunshards is one more lost combat on 3-1. This will also be a good time to talk about Aurelian Sol, who will hopefully be my backline carry for this comp. Aurelian Sol is a Targon unit who can only be unlocked by playing all 5 other Targon units on your board for a combat. Asol calls down massive stars on the opponent's boards, dealing AoE damage and collecting stardust, which accumulates over the game to upgrade his ability. However, because I am playing 3 Ixtal on my board, I'll be unable to unlock Asol until level 8 when I can play all 5 Targon on my board as well as Ixtal. The 3-2 augment is silver, meaning it won't have much impact on the game, but it's still important to pick the best thing for me. The 2 options I have here are Small Grab Bag and Titanic Titan. Titanic Titan would be good as it gives me more HP and helps me to reach my cash out in case I'm close to dying. However, I'm still pretty healthy and have a lot of sunshards, so I decide that the extra combat power for my board is better than the extra HP. Unfortunately for me, the 2 quests on the left are pretty difficult or costly to complete. Due to this, I end up taking the Lose Player Combats quest despite having a pretty strong board and having just passed up Titanic Titan for the extra HP. Here, at first I do think about frontlining my backline, but then I realize that the rest of the lobby is pretty powerful and I can probably just play my strongest board right now and still lose. Also, even if I do win a combat, my quest only requires me to lose 4 combats, not lose 4 combats in a row, so I wouldn't be devastated by winning a combat here. Since I'll just spend these next 4 combats losing, I'll take the time to talk a little bit more about unlocking Aurelian Sol. In order to unlock Aurelian Sol, I'll first need to unlock Diana, who requires a 2-star, 3-cost Leona with 3 items on my board for 1 combat. Preferably, I'll achieve this before level 8, so that once I do hit level 8, I can unlock Aurelian Sol that turn. On top of the Targon units, I also have a Jarvan, Lux, and Garen in my team planner. This is because Sylas, another 7-cost unit, requires you to sell a 2-star Jarvan, 2-star Lux, and 2-star Garen to unlock. While Sylas is not a core component of my team late game, he is a little bit of extra power that can help push my board to a first place in case my cash out is not the greatest. Here, I lose the last combat necessary in order to complete my quest and collect a few more sunshards in order to get closer to unlocking Brock. Now that I've completed that quest, I get 3 more options, and here I realize that I still need to find that Leona too, so I decide to pick the option for rerolling my shop. Also, it's good because I can complete it on this creep round and it won't take a player combat. As I'm rerolling my shop, I make sure to pick up all the Targon units, as well as the Garen, Lux, and Jarvan, as they will help get me closer to that Sylas. Once I've hit the required amount of rerolls, I stop and wait for the creep round to be over so that I've unlocked Brock and can play him on my board in the next combat. I also need to focus on econing up to make sure I can hit level 8 to unlock Aurelian Sol. Now that the creep round is over, I've unlocked Brock and I also get new quest options. Additionally, as you may have seen from the previous rounds, I also have the option to cash out. However, I believe that with Brock, my board will be strong enough to keep winning, and so I decide to keep collecting sunshards in order to push for an even better cash out. Notably, I decided to pick the Earn Interest quest. This is because I'm low on gold and I need to econ up in order to level and find Aurelian Sol. I also start slamming Aurelian Sol items on Zoe because I no longer need to lose combat, so I want to be as strong as possible. Aurelian Sol thrives with mana, and so I slam both Nashor's Tooth and Blue Buff on him in order to make sure he'll be able to cast as much as possible and collect as much Stardust as possible. I do end up winning this combat pretty commandingly, which makes me confident that I'll be able to finish my next quest without rolling to make my board stronger. Also, if you were paying attention earlier in the video, you'll have remembered that I said that Brock is immune to crowd control already, and I slammed a QSS on him. This is definitely a mistake, and Brock does not need a QSS. However, I do also have no better items to slam on him right now. As for the augment, I end up taking exclusive customization. This is because I have no tank items right now, and I feel like I need a few tank items on that Leona too. I also end up reforging that rod so that I can get a second tank item for the Leona. Another thing to note about items in this comp is that most of the Targon units burn, shred, or sunder. This means that you shouldn't need to build any burn, shred, or sunder in your items. I also start repositioning my team here. That's because I want to make sure I win, and in order to do this, I want my Leona tanking as much as possible, and I don't want anything getting onto my backline before it gets through my entire front line. Additionally, by placing those 2 items and the tier on my Leona, I satisfy the unlock conditions for Diana. This means that after I go level 8 and find a Taric, I'll be able to unlock Aurelian Sol. As for other units, if you've played this set at all and played Ixtal, you might know about Skarner. Skarner is a great tank utility unit, a part of the Ixtal trait. However, in order to unlock him, you need to put a Gargoyle Stone Plate on one of your non-tank units. Unfortunately, I haven't had the chance to make a Gargoyles this game, and therefore I haven't unlocked Skarner. However, if I did get the chance to make a Gargoyles, Skarner would be a great addition to my team, and if you ever play Ixtal, you should look out for unlocking Skarner. Now, I end up updating my board to make sure it's as strong as possible, and then I check my Ixtal quest. I'm 8 out of 20, which means I need 2 more rounds of 5 interest and 1 round of 2 interest. While I wait for that interest to accrue, I'll let you watch Brock do his thing in these combats. Now that I've got my interest up to 18, I only need 2 more in order to complete the Ixtal quest. This means that I can level up and roll a little bit for Taric in order to complete the unlock conditions for Aurelian Sol. Thankfully, I do find him above 20 gold, and I play him, completing those conditions so that I'll have Aurelian Sol for the next round. However, just because I've leveled and rolled here doesn't mean that my board is a lot stronger than it was before. I'm still missing Aurelian Sol for 1 more turn. Thus, my board doesn't do too well against this guy's, and I get very close to losing. This does scare me a little bit and makes me consider cashing out here, as I don't want to be stuck on the next quest without cashing out and end up dying. However, I will unlock Aurelian Sol soon, and I believe that my board will be strong enough. So after this combat, I will choose to push further and choose another quest. After picking up Asol, I get 3 more options for quests. I see one is block damage with an Ixtal champion. For that, I check and see if my Brock is blocking nearly that much damage, and I see that he isn't, so I can't pick that one. I also don't want to go down to 0 gold for the 0 gold quest, because I need to econ up right now in order to make sure I have enough gold to find Aurelian Sol 2 and or Brock 2 later on. Thus, I pick the only option left, and choose the one to have allies die in combat. I'm not sure how long this will take, because I don't know how many of my allies will be dying in each combat, but I'm confident I'll be able to live long enough for it, because I don't think I'll be losing too many of the combats, and I also don't think I'll be losing by too many units. With the creep round over, I do have a decent amount of gold, so I decide to roll a little bit in order to get some upgrades on my board. However, I don't want to roll too deeply, to the point where I wouldn't be able to find Brock or Asol 2 later. I managed to pick up a Tariq 2 and a Diana 2, which are definitely pretty good upgrades to my board, and then I put my Asol on the board over the Aphelios and swapped the items over from Zoe. The important thing here is that I'm choosing to take out Aphelios because he is definitely the most useless of the Targon units here, and Zoe is still very important despite not having items because she provides shred for my Aurelian Sol. Now, in this combat, you might be seeing that the Aurelian Sol isn't doing a whole lot. That's because he doesn't have very much Stardust stacked up. At first, his ability is just a little star that crashes down, dealing damage to nearby enemies from his target. But afterwards, you see, he stacked up a bit of Stardust and he shoots out a little shockwave outside. As he collects more Stardust, his ability will only continue to upgrade and he'll start out-damaging the Brock, possibly. Now that that combat's over, I decide to roll a little bit more, as I'm afraid my board might lose to certain boards. And I end up finding that Lux 2, which unlocks me Sylas, and then I remove those units from my team planner as I will no longer need to buy them. Here, I contemplate which Targon unit to take out for the Sylas, and I end up deciding on Zoe, because I think I'll need more frontline for that Aurelian Sol over the Shred. Also, with the Brock being my largest damage dealer, the Shred isn't as important. I additionally decide to shift my items over as I realize the QSS isn't doing very much on the Brock because he's already immune to crowd control, and instead I put a tank item on him to make sure he isn't dying. For this combat, you'll see that my Aurelian Sol is starting to out-damage my Brock because he's stacked up enough Stardust that his ability is actually dealing decent damage to the enemies. Also, you'll see Sylas putting in a little bit of work, but he's not doing too much considering he only has one item. You'll also see me typing holy 3 7 costs up in the top left. That's because this game I have 3 7 costs on my board, which is pretty uncommon considering most of the time you'll only see 0 to 1 7 costs on anyone's board. In that combat though, not many of my units died, so I'm still only 6 out of 20 for the Ixtal quest. Because of this, I'm getting a bit delayed on completing this quest, and I'm worried that I won't be able to push this cash out too much more. However, I'm still pretty healthy, so unless I start losing combats, I won't be too worried. Unfortunately for me, I do end up facing someone pretty strong, a dude with 7 Noxus and a Draven 3 plus Darius 3 duo, so I end up losing the combat, putting me a little bit closer to death. However, this does mean that all of my units will die in the combat, and I'll have 8 more, only 6 away from completing the quest. Additionally, I only end up losing by a few units. This puts me down to 19 HP, which is a guaranteed survival in the next round, meaning that I'm guaranteed to finish that quest, and unfortunately I will have to cash out considering my board isn't too much stronger than the rest. For this carousel, I'm looking out for items for my Brock, because he still has 1 tank item on him. I see that Deathblade and that Giant Slayer, and I end up going for the Deathblade as I believe it's what will be best for my Brock. Arguments could have been made for other items on that carousel, however, the meta's not yet super defined considering this is on PBE, so I do just end up taking the Giant Slayer, although it might not be the best possible option. Because I'm down to 2 lives here, I end up deciding to level to try and make my board a little bit stronger. This is because when I cash out, I don't necessarily want to be down on 1 life, in case my cash out is something that requires a little bit of input and time, and I might not be able to make a board with it before the round starts. I end up adding that Zoe for Shred for my Aurelian Sol, and, well, you'll see how the next combat goes with that. I do end up beating that weaker Noxus board, which didn't have a Draven 3, likely due to being contested by the previous Noxus board. However, I did win with 4 units left on my board, meaning 5 of my units died and I'm still 1 away from finishing the quest. Because of this, I end up panic rolling a little bit to try and improve my board. However, there aren't really any improvements to be made, and this is certainly a mistake, as I definitely don't have enough gold to find Brock or Aurelian Sol 2 here. I end up facing a pretty strong Bilgewater board, and because of his very powerful Gangplank, I end up losing this combat, which further solidifies my need to cash out on the next quest and not take a new quest instead. While you might be tempted to consider pushing the cash out to look for a 1000 cash out, which gives you an automatic 3-star 5 cost so you win the game, it's important to realize what's feasible. You don't want to lose a 900 cash out in order to push a little bit further to that 1000. Thus, I make the practical choice here, and on the start of this creep round, I cash out my 900 stacks. I end up getting some gold, 2 Force of Natures or Tactician's Crowns, and 3 Radiant items. While this is no 3-star 5 cost, with my board, this is pretty much an instant win of the game. All I need to do is find 2 decent units to fill those extra 2 slots, and also find some replacement units for the Ixtals that I no longer need on my board after I've cashed out. Now that I've gotten those items from the creep round and rolled a little bit for those extra units to fill up my board is complete, and I know that I'll be winning this game unless someone else hits something crazy. So, I'll stop talking from here and I'll let you watch the rest of the chaos unfold. And there you have it. I ended up winning the game. If you guys enjoyed, please feel free to leave a like or subscribe, and thank you for watching.